Hello, Robert. Welcome back to Today in Packaging podcast.
Good morning, Wilberto, and it's good to be back again. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, excellent. I'm happy. You see my background?
That's a beautiful background.
I can smell fresh air.
It's a beautiful background. It's a very solace and peaceful background.
Robert, we are recording now the second part of our factory acceptance test podcast. The first one we touched base with a lot of topic, right, related to people, cost, impact to operation, branding, right. On this one, we are going to be talking with of variabilities, new production line, hybrid production lines, and the new normal post COVID. So we are going
Yeah,
to have fun on this one.
yeah,
Let's start with the first one, Robert, variability. Tell me about the baseline of this topic.
yeah. Wilberto, good segue as we enter into this session, session two. Again, the first session we did a few weeks ago was the prelude to where we are today. But variability, I think, is a very important milestone to get our hands around in FATs. And really, what we want to talk about are the ingredients of an FAT, and then post FAT into operation. So we're talking about, your people again. We're talking about the actual equipment. We're talking about specifications of the material and product, standards and procedures. And then a fourth nugget, which is very important, oftentimes missed, it's called modes of operation. And that's very, very important. So these are the key four building blocks as we go through today on variability. We want to just dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. On our first podcast, we touched base a little bit but about people. On this one, let's go a little bit more deep, okay? Because variability, one of the main objectives of this is how we measure the success or failure of the people, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So how we can express easy in our words, you know, h- that we can determine that a people is ready to proceed to execute FIT or not. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So we're going to do both internal and external, right? Because that's part of the team here. And being ready, I think you have to start with an assessment, right? So skill set assessment on capabilities, technical and actual activities. So the activities that are going to be performed at the FAT, we want to make sure those are understood and people are really well rounded in understanding what they're going to do, and then having them understand where the risks are, the risks, and then the solutions. At least bring that to the table to have a collaboration. So
Mhm.
I think an assessment is very, very important. And then looking at the again back again skill level. Are they at the minimal level? Are they experts, or are they coaches? So to figure out kind of how you go after the FAT. So I think that's very important. And furthermore, external. So that was sort of an internal assessment. External is the same. That's kind of hard to do, because there you need a good relationship with your external supplier, your OEM, to really have them, discuss, their internal training and capability of the people conducting the FAT that they're going to have at their facility for us.
Yeah, on our first podcast about this topic, we talk about a lot about the skill, the importance of have a pre-FIT communication process, right, with them. On this one, I think that one of the also another way to take a measurement and quantify the knowledge of the people is that companies should allow to present this engineer the plan to a board, to a committee, or to the manager, or to the operational people, so they can prove that they are ready and they understand exactly what they are need to do on that factory acceptance test. Do you think that this is something that the company should start to do? Like a preparation part, presentation mood, before execute FIT?
Yeah, I think again, we talk about the journey of collaboration is continual. So I think that the key is not just the presentation, but it's the content of what should be in the FATs. For instance, if we talk about in the people side again, what do they know about the technical aspects of this FAT? Whether it could be safety, whether it's I'm going to make up something here. They're doing seal checks in the FAT, working with the quality team, and they're packaging materials engineer. Let's just use that person. What's their skill level and talent, or, a knowledge level relative to the equipment interface? Again, material and equipment go hand in hand, right? So then you've got the quality team looking and saying, do we have the right seal integrity? You've got the material team saying we've got these characteristics. So each member provides these ingredients into the document. A document, again, we talked last time, whether it's electronic or hard copy, hopefully again electronic when we're doing it, to unveil. And that's knowledge sharing. So you're right, Wilberto, you have this knowledge sharing base, and in essence you capture what's potentially missing, and it gives us a chance to get the right brains around what should be in that content. And then most importantly, if it's internal at the CPG, you can transfer that out externally to your supplier and get their input and have that engagement.
You hit the ball really hard on that one, Robert, because safety, quality, other departments. And for me, this is the key to be sure that the people are ready, and the word is collaboration. If you prove to others that you are collaborating with other departments, that means that you are acquiring all the knowledge that you need or more to execute a successful factory acceptance test. So you boop, hit it really hard on that one. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, yeah. But
Yeah, yeah,
oftentimes, Wilberto, that's missed. The simple things are missed, and those are the things that impact the FATs the most.
yeah.
But keep going. Good question though.
But I think, I think that at least to see that the people are trying to collaborate, we are reducing error and omissions. So
You are. You are. It's been proven.
yeah, exactly. So below variability, let's go about to talk about equipment. So on this part, how to measure the test, how this is for me, and you can put your point. I believe that this is where the key communication with the OEM need to happen, and the OEM need to understand the needs of the customer.
You hit it. That's a very good, I guess, segue into my point here. You're right. That's key. It's so let's just take the audience here. So you have
Mhm,
the hiring company. Let's just call a pharma company,
mhm,
and you have an OEM. So we would agree that the OEM is the expert on their equipment as far as the design, performance, um, its capabilities, its design capabilities. Yes.
mhm.
We would also say that the pharma companies are the experts on their product and their materials that they're using for running on the equipment. What's oftentimes missing, and we talk about variability here, is the equipment variability because of the inputs received or not received by the pharma company. As an example, what are the limits and tolerances on said product and material? All right, we can use any indicator. It could be flow rate, it could be tensile strength on materials, etc., or dimensional, geometrical tolerancing
Yeah.
on physical products. That if we don't get that to the OEM in a timely manner, then they're going to design around certain specifications that they think are industry standard. And hence, when you go to an FAT, you get abnormalities, which are variabilities where you have stoppages, where you can't open a carton correctly in the case, or if it's a vial, you can't get the vial denested and into the system and the equipment because it's out of spec. And that batch of that product is out of the specs that we have in our internal system as pharma company. So we need controls. Remember, we talked about specifications, standards, and procedures. Those have got to be understood from us as a pharma company to the OEM. And the OEM needs to say, yeah, this is within spec, and we're able to run this at a agreed efficiency.
This is something really, really important. I want to mention that if the people that represent the customer, with the OEM or the company that will execute the FIT, um, they need to play an important role to provide the clear information to the OEM. They can assume that the OEM understand their process. Sometimes they send companies send to the OEM samples, drawings, but they forget to provide the correct information about the assembling of graphics, orientation, and not always the OEM will understand that from the first time. So it's important also more, what Robert said, but people that represent the company that will execute the FIT need to be clear about orientation and placement of the component in the package. Because, sometimes most of the failure happen on that communication, Robert.
Oh yeah, for sure, Roberto. I think you're spot on. It's assumptions. The key word is assuming,
Assuming.
and we're going to talk later about this fast-paced uh, cycle we're in now to
Mhm.
produce faster, quicker, and that just further exacerbates the need for first. Let's take a step back. We need to debrief and say, what do we have in our toolbox? What standards and procedures do we have? Does it meet the industry requirement? Does it meet what the supplier needs? So that needs to happen first on in the process. And I think we bypass that gate by assuming we have it. And we find out as we go into an FAT, wow, why are we having these stoppages? It's because that product is on the high end of its tolerance.
Yeah.
All right. So we need to collaborate with the OEM, and the OEM needs to say, yep, we believe we ran this type of product before, or we have not. We've been close, something similar. But what we're going to need to do in our FAT, we're going to need to accommodate this potential variability as far as time allotted to produce that FAT. So, but that has to happen continually, and needs to be part of the specification package that both parties work from.
Yes. Let's finish with this topic mentioning the last two items below the baseline for variability, which is the standard, materials, specifications, and the mood operation. Let's put both together,
Yeah.
and let's mention a little bit about this topic.
Yep, that's interesting. So again, these four core areas about variability. So what we're really essentially saying to those who will watch this podcast is you can have a successful FAT or a failed FAT because one out of the four these of these areas in variability will impact you. So when we talk now about materials, it's a no-brainer. We've been talking a little bit about that in product is, do we document what we're going to do that we can translate that over to external suppliers? Yeah. And even our internal departments and functions, that'll be part of the FAT, right? They're going to come in and they're going to be executing some activities off this master FAT sort of list of things that we're going to validate and check, right?
Mhm.
So I think material standards are great. The information needs to be on the drawing. It needs to be documented, right? And it needs to be cascaded in our proposal to the OEM. The big piece here is one that is often missed. So what we've been talking about up to now are itemized activities, right? Materials, people, standards, and procedures. They're categorized, yes? So now you put all these three together and equipment, right? So you're going to have these as they assemble together to become a production line, and that production line has a personality, and it's called modes of operation and engagement. That, let's just take the pharma company again. That their plan is to run this line a certain way, and they have routines of engagement, how they're going to interact with materials, line stoppages that they induce to perform regulatory guidelines for compliance, yes? So those behaviors are, if they're not documented in the specifications by someone on the team, again, we go back to people, skill level, getting that documented so that it's known, then what happens is when you go to an FAT, when you don't have all the equipment buttoned together because the facility can't house all these long conveyors versus these different pieces, assembly pieces of equipment, you mimic what can happen in operations, but you don't tactfully or collectively say, this is really how we're going to interface with these two pieces of equipment
Yeah.
upstream versus downstream. And what happens is you have stoppages, line stoppages, and it affects your throughput. So when we get to our further part of this podcast, we'll talk about the industry impact to this, and especially with having to do things quicker, faster, and getting product to market. So I think modes of operations, Wilberto, we could talk a separate podcast on
Yeah,
that
of course.
because it's a huge deal, but it's a simple deal. And what we need to do is just say, wow, as you said earlier, how do we sit and collaborate and engage the supplier knowledge, our internal team's knowledge on what we plan on doing with this line day to day, shift to shift, so they can design for that, um, being proactive. So yeah, variability in these 4 areas, to sum it up, is very important that we find baseline, and then anything away from baseline, we document it and we test and validate that.
Yeah. For me to close this topic, everything that we mentioned here, everything that you just mentioned now, below a standard material specification and mode operation, need to be well defined during the scope of work development. Period. That document, that process is the one that will take you to a successful communication, collaboration during the factory acceptance test.
I would agree.
Okay, so let's move to the second topic from this podcast, which is the new production and hybrid production lines. We mentioned in our last podcast, Robert, that when you have an FIT because you bought a new equipment, and if you bought a new equipment is because you want to improve your supply chain, your OE, or introduce new product to your facility, right? So
Exactly.
let's go more deep on this, especially let's start with the hybrid production line. Let's explain this with more detail.
Yeah, this is nothing new, but it happens all the time. And what we have, we've got more existing uh, facilities producing goods and
Mhm.
products, right? And across all industries. So you're going to have these existing production lines that you're going to modify for several reasons. One is probably throughput, more throughput out of what you have, driven by innovation or renovation of brands needing to get more and do something different to get in the market, or you're solving some internal uh, requirements because they're regulatory requirements, ergonomics and safety, labor, right? Trying to reduce some labor potential challenges you may be facing. Or in today, moving forward, the labor force, retirement, and people not entering into the labor force, wanting to do the same tasks that people prior to them were doing. It's a different mindset, it's a different culture. So, i.e., we usher in more of the automation requirements. So, when you talk about now the FAT, and we're going to talk about the pre-FAT impact on a
Mhm.
hybrid model, it simply means how much of this technology will we add on this modification of this existing asset that our internal facility can stomach and digest relative to what we've done in the past. So, the hybrid is the way. I think it's a way to get in business quicker, with modifying what we have if we can do it, but not at the risk of underperformance. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really interesting that you mentioned, because when you have a new production line, Robert, you are in the mood to work with all the specification and requirement that you need to run the entire line, right? Because you are buying new equipments, and you know that this equipment need to be well connected with this one, and you design everything perfect with line integration and everything. But when we talk about hybrid in the introducing partial equipments, one of the big mistake is that people forgot to evaluate the downstream or upstream of the new equipment. What will be the impact? What we need to add to this equipment to be able to be successful in the full integration of the line after this new equipment is installed?
Well, you're exactly right. So the hybrid is a way to do business and a way to do it. There's more of the hybrid, right? So there's, with the economy, with growth, yeah, there are building expansions happening. So some brownfield expansion, the traditional greenfield growth is there. But I would say from my experience in the past, you have more of the brownfield hybrid modification. That just further complicates it when you're not looking holistically up and downstream of what's happening to what you're changing from a throughput standpoint, or just from a operator. Let's go back to that engagement, how that operator now you're asking them to do something differently with some automation. Um, so what we need to do is that comes back to that FAT again. How do you now modify your FAT documentation to accommodate the hybrid, right? So a new line, as you said, is an easier way. You plan it out. You should. Hopefully, you've got all your ingredients and variability into your documents, your specifications. But when you have a hybrid, a 30-year-old piece of equipment that really wasn't designed to this, I'm not going to use the word safety requirements, because all equipment should be safe and up to the levels to be compliant to operate today. But how do you hodgepodge? That's not the good right word, but how do you migrate these two technologies, the older technology and the new ones, and create these specifications and the FAT documentation so it makes sense, and it's really a quality document, right? So again, the skill level, we go back to that training. That sometimes is outside of the core competence of the hiring company, the food and beverage or the pharma company or the OEMs. So they need a third set of eyes, someone that's non-biased, that will look at their system and help them, design the best possible FAT for them to win, and that meets all of their internal, external requirements. So, companies like PackBrain and InnoFlex Solutions, we pretty much we standardize in helping companies look at things like this.
Yes. Robert, I have a question just came to my mind.
More questions? Oh my goodness.
This is the last question about this topic, but this is
Sure.
just this is not in the conversation. This is just came to my mind.
Shoot it.
We are live. um, so when we are in the hybrid packaging lines, sometimes you just mentioned that the company has an equipment of 30 years old and they want to replace it, right? And you mentioned safety factors. So what happened when some project that the decision is, okay, we are going to upgrade the equipment that we are replacing for the new safety model or for the new safety regulation, but whatever is existing, we are not going to invest money to change it. We are
Mm.
going to do it later.
Oh,
So you follow me where I'm coming
yeah.
from?
Yeah.
If I will buy a new equipment and this new equipment need to be up to the new safety standard, why the other ones will not? So I believe that if you are have a business and your decision is to include new equipment with the new safety regulation, which should be, because safety should be first, right? And you should take time to evaluate the impact for the other one and put the capital and execute it, because not make sense that you have a mix of safety regulation in place.
Well, I don't want to get too deep in that. Just to say you're spot on, right? That's an issue that's facing the industry today. A lot of companies have addressed this,
Okay.
and they do address it, that you can't grandfather unsafe equipment. You should be resolving it. Yeah. So if you're going to upgrade the controls, the safety circuits on machinery, and it's near the new equipment is right near. Let me give it say it another way. You've got a new feature on your old equipment that has a new safety device, safety circuit on it. You've got an old equipment right next to it that's similar, but different with an old safety circuit. We're not going to get into the requirements here
Yeah, of course.
that deep, but just to say that you've got the same operator working on both, that's a problem. So you have to upgrade the equipment to keep the operator safe, anyone safe, from working on different vintages of equipment that have different training and skill sets because it's not humanly possibly possible to kind of remember quickly. You know, when you have a minor or micro stop, minor or micro, to get in and lock out, tag out, and all that to remove the issue. So we want to make sure we upgrade, keep things like in kind. So your question is, every company takes that on and assesses it internally and tries to comply to the
Yeah.
governmental regulations and their own internal regulations.
Yeah, thank you. Because yeah, that is the correct answer. Every company have their own internal evaluation and make their own decisions. But it's important to mention in case that people have the question. Okay, so let's go to the last one, and this one is really innovative. Okay, which is the new normal post-COVID, right?
Yeah.
Pandemic hit us, a new digital revolution is in front of us. Virtual FIT, Robert. Do you think that this is the new way to execute this type of evaluation, or this is something that will be reducing dramatically over the years?
Well, I think that we talked about last time about being transforming ourselves due to uh, world conditions. Yeah, and that impacted all different industrial areas of goods and services. So I think we were challenged to move forward with AR quicker in some areas. It's a tool that's out there, augmented reality. So in FATs, what it has done is it enabled us to not be on site because of the challenges we had, but also to conduct an FAT, to do more, to be prepared, hopefully better, to know what to look for and look at in virtual reality or AR, so augmented reality, and to be able to validate what the FAT should do. But I'm going to challenge the use of the tool because it's an enabler. It won't do the job for you. It goes back to, we talked about this last time, do you have the right specifications? Do you have the right standards? Do you have the right uh, ingredients on an FAT to know what to look for? If it's a challenge, how do you mitigate it, the risk? And then what's the plan for correcting it in the mitigation? So you talked earlier, Roberto, about skill level, and it ties into what to look for. It goes back again to, are we equipped to have the right ingredients? I'm repeating myself, in the documentation electronically. So when we do it through AR, we're just validating what we've already assessed, and seeing if it passes or fail. So AR is an enabler, and with the need for speed today and traveling to these FATs and the cost we talked last time, I think it's a tool we can use to help us to move forward. But again, we need to make sure we have the right ingredients in the FAT. Otherwise, it's not going to be good. And I think if we talk about the pre-FAT, that's really more important than the FAT.
I think that virtual is a great option for some type of equipment, not for all of them. But for me to be successful in a virtual FIT, the people need to spend more time to be sure that the communication documentation is clear enough to avoid mistake, because when you are virtual, OEM is the one that have the control of the angle of the camera, the time of the running, and you need to trust that any failure or anything that they need to update, or upgrade or fix during the FIT, you need to trust in their word, because you are not there to learn, to see exactly what happened or how happened, because you don't have all the point of view,
Yeah.
right? I believe that will be reduced a little bit, but again, will be for small equipment, equipment that are track and error, equipment that are really simple, low speed. But for example, if we are going to do, we bought an equipment that run really fast, that requires several transitions, that requires several inspections. I don't think so that the camera will help to cover all the need and requirement or acceptance criteria that we should have as a customer. This is my point of view. It's good, but if you don't have a good documentation clear enough and a good plan ahead of the FIT, you will have more failure than the one that you mentioned in terms of percentage already.
Yeah. So traditional experience, I'm not going to mention the organizations
Yeah,
for
of
the
course.
data, but from experience, I'm going to use myself being part of FATs that, and it's out there, right? I mentioned last time census data just on errors and omissions, and you turn it into failed FATs. My experience of seeing 50% to 60% of FATs, first and second attempts fail. And again, it depends on the complication of the type of equipment. That's general industry speaking, right? Just not, I'm just talking across the industry. What I would say, Wilberto, and I would agree with you, is that augmented reality should be used more for your pre-FAT. So it's a validation tool to say,
Exactly.
we should be running this conveyor at this many feet per minute. We should be doing this labeling application at
Yes.
this many labels a minute, and the quality of the code or the label, whatever we need to see it through the camera. It should be, as you progress through your project plan, you should be able to do snapshots to validate, to help and it really should help the OEM become more excellent in what they do. Not that they're not, but as entrusting their customer to say, yeah, I can see it without having to send people there. So my risk, what we want to do is reduce the risk of failure.
Mm-hmm.
We want to minimize that to failure to zero. And one way to do that is have snapshots of these validation steps with the specifications, with the standards, as you say, Wilberto, with visualization. And what you won't get at, distance visualization, and you're right, you won't hear certain things you would hear being there, like the machine noise, or it's rhythm. It has a sound to it. When you walk a factory floor, you hear how equipment sounds when it runs well. When it doesn't run well, you hear it, right?
You're right. You're right.
So so my point here is that what you want to use that tool as, and remember I use the word enabler, to help you minimize these risks, and these that we talked about, we identified collaboratively in our step one, which was variability.
Yes.
So now we've got all these variability items in our 4 main areas documented. Now we're going to validate it through AR. And if we could not get into the facilities because of, God forbid, again, another pandemic, or that will suppress, travel, et cetera, then that would be the way to go. But I still think it's a tool that will grow in more acceptance as we become more excellent in those 4 areas of variability, so we can, trap all that down, documentate that down, so we can verify that through the tools.
Yeah, and yeah, totally agree with that statement. But again, like you mentioned, people need to take more responsibility now than before to be able to have a successful FIT. Because if you have a higher, factory acceptance test live, and more than 50% most of the time failure, or more than 40% go to a third time FIT, I can imagine if you don't have a good communication, good documentation, or good knowledge transfer, the number for virtual FIT will be really high. So like you mentioned,
Yeah,
we need to back to this principle that we just mentioned in this podcast, so you have a better success for FIT and virtual FIT. Both. I think that both present or virtual will require communication, collaboration, understanding of what exactly we need to have.
exactly. I would agree, Wilberto. You hit it on the head. And as I was thinking about this session too, I was thinking about really what's important for all these FATs and why we're doing it, and then what's pulling the food and beverage companies and the OEMs. Well, it's the growth of the industry, right? So there's
Yeah.
industry KPIs, which says in Q3 right now, capital equipment, and it's going to be, there's a percentage higher of the need and the growth for those being places purchase orders, and that leads to design reviews, more FATs, right? and the consumer demand. So there's pent up demand. So, now we're faced with, wow, we've got all this that we couldn't ship out because we didn't have the labor to go into factories to build it, or maybe the components, the electronic components being delayed because of, our uh, a pandemic, not having stuff on time. Now we need to accelerate getting it out. So we don't want to just accelerate it because we got a commitment. We need to do it with excellence, and we need to do
Yeah.
it so it's not underperforming when it's received. There's nothing worse, you and I have experienced this, than getting a system on time and it underperformed versus a system late that performed. I don't
Yeah.
want either one of those scenarios. I don't want it
Yeah.
late and I don't want it to underperform. But we need to make sure that it performs when it reaches its designation on the factory floor, so
Yeah.
you can meet your commitments to your external customers outside your facility. So that's the industry standpoint. And then I would just say that the access to production lines, as we know, we're not out of the woods yet. So companies are still, monitoring who they let in their facilities. So we just need to be smart and utilize these augmented reality tools and the FAT and pre-FAT better. So when you're going in, getting done quicker, and you don't have to go in as much because the lines are running better.
Yeah. Exactly. So to close this podcast, an excellent podcast with you again, Robert. It's really important that people never forget one of the stages of project management, which is monitoring and controlling. FIT, factor acceptance test, is a key aspect of that, because you have the successful FIT doesn't mean that you're done with the job. You need to continue monitoring the process and controlling any failure or any upgrade that is required in your packaging operation. So thank you, Robert, for your time today.
Well, Berto, is always good. And I like your shirt, by the way. That's an exciting shirt. No packaging, no life. I've heard that before. That's
It's true,
pretty
right?
much on point. Yeah.
It's true. No packaging, no life. So that is what I eat, sleep, everything packaging.
Well, I think that's a good thing. And I always enjoy our discussions. I think we're seeing great upticks in the industry. So we want to be a part of helping people win companies. So thank you again for inviting me. And I
Of
enjoyed it.
course, of course, of course. And you that watch today in Packaging Podcast, thank you. You saw the part 2 of Factory Acceptance Test with Robert Champion and Wilberto Torres. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.